There we go. Ready? What's up, everybody? Welcome into the Indiana Convention Center, the site of the 2025 NFL Scouting Combine. This is Shout a Buffalo Bills football podcast brought to you by Tops Friendly Markets. Head over to Tops this weekend. Get yourself set up for any parties you're hosting or just getting ready for the week. Shout brought to you by Tops. All right, I got a big guest. Every year at the Combine, my man, I really appreciate you doing this every single year. You're a local guy, so we kind of get to keep in touch throughout the season. But I really like to kind of start draft season off with a look into this whole thing with our guy, Chris Trapasso from CBS Sports. How are you, my friend?
I'm doing really good. I think we got to work on our DAP a little bit.
That was horrible. That was horrible.
Let's do it again. There you go.
Yes, there we go. That's big time.
We've gotten tight over the years being Bills guys locally, Western New York. But yeah, this is, I don't want to say it's my Super Bowl. Like the Super Bowl is still the Super Bowl for me, but this is such a fun time of the year, especially after these guys work out where we can look at all the numbers, get a better idea of where a player is going to be drafted. Guys are going to move down boards a little bit and up boards a little. This is a really fun week, and I think it is very helpful for the evaluation process.
So where I want to start is just kind of like a 30,000-foot view at the Bills in general, because I think when you're thinking about what the Bills want to try to accomplish with this pick or what they want to do in the first round or wherever they end up picking, you have to take stock in where they ended the season, the roster construction. What was your big takeaway with how last season went, where you feel like the biggest deficiency is, and maybe where that might align with how this draft is stacking up, what might be available at 30?
Well, you're teeing me up with that question because to bring in Jordan Phillips and Quentin Jefferson late in the season showed that the Bills were kind of in an emergency situation at defensive tackle. They ultimately couldn't get to Patrick Mahomes in the AFC title game. He goes to the Super Bowl, gets sacked 5 times, has a lot of problems against that really elite level defensive front in Philly. And if you're going to ask, how does that align? The defensive tackle class is really, really good. So good that at pick 30, the Bills should be feeling good about who they could ultimately pick there if they want to go in that direction.
So I want to start off with a very, to me, interesting player because of his fit in college. I'm talking about Kenneth Grant, the defensive tackle from Michigan. Obviously, a lot of the hype this week about Mason Graham, rightfully so. But the two of those guys kind of combined to become a force on the interior of that Michigan defensive line. Graham's going to probably be a top 5 pick. Grant is kind of interesting because depending on who you talk to, there's people that are super high on him, maybe a top 15 pick. Then there are some people that think he might be available there for the Bills late in the round. What's your evaluation on this player? And if he is there at 30, in terms of what the Bills need, they have Ed Oliver. They have that prototypical 3 technique. Do you envision a Kenneth Grant being a guy that you can put alongside an Ed Oliver and have them kind of being a match made in heaven?
Yeah, so this would be where there's a difference between me grading players just from afar, like for the entire NFL, how I value the defensive tackle position, and a team like the Bills saying, look, we know Kenneth Grant is not the all-around 12-sack, 80-tackle defensive lineman, but next to Ed Oliver, he's kind of exactly what we need. And I think this situation here in Indianapolis would maybe be a spot where the Bills don't necessarily want Kenneth Grant to blow the doors off the combine like Jordan Davis did a few years ago, 6'3", 340, and to run a crazy 40-yard dash with a big vertical broad jump, things like that, because that would increase the chances that he's not going to be there if he does that. So, yeah, I don't grade him as the 30th best player in this class in a vacuum, but next to Ed Oliver, the Bills have shown they want a Star Lotulelei, a Jordan Phillips, a Quentin Jefferson next to their up-the-field pass rusher. And Kenneth Grant, to me, if you're just looking at the defensive tackle spot from a nose tackle perspective, he's the best one in this class.
Yeah, that's really interesting. And I also think, to me, what they really have to figure out a way to do is to bring in a player. And obviously much has been made about the trades, right? Myles Garrett, Max Crosby, edge players that could potentially change the math for this defensive line. But what I don't think the Bills have done a good enough job of in recent years, they add Dwayne Carter. That's the first defensive tackle they've drafted since Ed Oliver. To me, in the modern NFL, you cannot do that. You got to continue to kind of fill the cupboards with talent. Last year, I was pounding the table at 33. After they traded back, they took Keon Coleman. I thought they should have taken Tavondre Sweat. He goes out and has this unbelievable year. Now, were there question marks? Of course. Yeah. He was falling in the draft. I get all of that. But in terms of a big athletic player, is there somebody in this draft that kind of fits that mold? Is Grant that kind of player? Or who would you kind of like in a perfect world as a Bills fan that watches this team every Sunday or Monday? Who would you want to pair at Oliver with in a perfect world?
Yeah, Kenneth Grant would probably be that guy. And I just said he's the best nose tackle, but I was forgetting, which I don't know how I forgot this guy because he's enormous. Deion Walker from Kentucky.
6'7"?
6'7", 345. 2 years ago for the Wildcats was near the top of all of college football in pressures. So he showed that, I'm not going to say he's Dexter Lawrence, but he showed a Dexter Lawrence-like ability to push the pocket and to disrupt on passing downs, which usually at that size, you don't really see it very often. He's my comparison for Deion Walker. So either of those two, if the Bills want to finally, like you're saying, to go the young route for the big player next to Ed Oliver when they've patchworked it with free agents and on one-year deals with veterans, either one of those two would make the most sense. And it kind of feels like they're going to be in that late first to late second round range.
So on the outside at edge rusher, so much has been made about a big swing. And now you look at the salary cap, and honestly, with the Bills sitting there at about even, they have a little bit of work to do to kind of open up even more space. But I think there is potential to open up $45 million if Brandon Beane really wants to get aggressive. And now that you have to start entertaining a potential trade for a Garrett, Crosby, Trey Hendrickson. There are some guys out there. But if that doesn't materialize, and maybe those deals might not really materialize into the summer, maybe into the season when you're looking at maybe a trade deadline kind of situation where an Andrew Berry is sitting there with a miserable Myles Garrett and he's just got to pull the trigger eventually. Yeah. But maybe that doesn't happen until down the road. So in this draft right now, there's a couple of different players, and I want to ask you specifically about the Georgia kid, Mikel Williams.
Yeah.
So he's somebody that you wrote in your top 50 big board. He really flashed a couple of years ago, didn't have a great last season at Georgia. Is that somebody that you think could fall and there would be value there? And you wrote that he's flashy, he's got the measurables, the traits. You know Brandon Beane loves that.
Yeah, that's what you just said was going to be like where I was going to start. If we're going to think that the Bills at edge, and it's also a very good edge class overall, kind of this similar to defensive tackle where the Bills should feel good about who they could pick at pick 30 at that position if that's where they want to go. Mikel Williams, I think he's going to test pretty well, but the measurables are going to be through the roof, like 6'5", 280-ish with insanely long arms. He's going to make first contact on offensive tackles more than anything else, and that's what the Bills have gravitated toward. Greg Rousseau was not a finished product coming out of Miami. 1 year there, didn't play the COVID year, but was like 6'7", 255, crazy long arms. They believed that their coaching staff, their D-line coach, could get the most out of them. Mikel Williams, as a sophomore at Georgia, looked like a future number 1 overall pick. Never really improved from there. So maybe do the Bills look at that as a red flag, or do they say there's still a lot of untapped potential because he is still very young? I think he's still only 21 years old. So Mikel Williams is someone, if he doesn't blow the doors off the combine in terms of vertical and 40 and broad jump, he could be available close to the pick 30 that the Bills have and would be that next line of developmental players with high upside at the edge rusher spot.
I also want to ask you about Mike Green, intriguing prospect. Obviously, whenever you hear wrestling, you think Sean McDermott's, his alarm bells go off. He loves all those.
Little label for any of the wrestlers in the Bills boardroom.
I'm pretty sure Brandon Beane has whatever he moves guys up for, like, you mentioned the measurables. That's Sean McDermott,
yes.
Right? You're moving up on his board. The interesting thing about him is he left Virginia because of a domestic violence incident. He actually talked about it today at the Combine. There was one in high school, I guess, as well. So that's one of the areas where you mentioned Sweat, you mentioned Jalen Carter a couple of years ago. Those are guys that usually don't stick out on their board. And actually, Brandon Beane has been open about it. If they don't pass that character check, a lot of times they won't even consider them at spots. So I want to ask you about this guy because there's some people, I think Jeremiah had him in the top 10 of his latest mock draft. Is this a guy that if because of that he falls and he's now there at 30, what are your thoughts on him, fit in the scheme, and also just the prospect?
All right, so I'm going to go super nerdy with my comp for Mike Green. It's Joseph Osai, who hasn't really turned out to be a tremendous player for the Bengals. He was a late second rounder, but was a size, speed, and bend specimen coming out of Texas. Tested through the roof. The thoughts are that Mike Green for Marshall is going to test that well. I want to see him get stronger at the next level, but those traits, that explosiveness, the bend, the dip ability around the corner, that's what I think gravitated the Bills toward Von Miller. That's where Mike Green, I think, can have a case as being the best in this entire class after Abdul Carter in terms of just winning around the corner and flattening the edge and disrupting quarterbacks that way. Now, he did it against lesser competition, but the traits, he was like 6'3", 250 at the Senior Bowl. The traits are absolutely through the roof with him. He could be someone, because of the off-field stuff, that maybe the Bills haven't prioritized those players, obviously, but he might be too good with too much upside to pass up if he gets within striking distance for the Bills in the first round.
Interesting. Let's stay on the defensive line for one more. Is there somebody, a day 2 or day 3 target on the defensive line, edge or defensive tackle, that maybe isn't getting a lot of buzz right now that you think, man, if they're there, that might be the Bills' flavor, something that they're missing, somebody you liked on tape, any kind of category like that?
Yeah, I'm going deep cut here. Jod Joyner from Minnesota. I implore you to watch his film. He was, I think, a 2-year captain at Minnesota, which a lot of these guys were captains that are here at the Combine. But I think that is probably a label that the Bills have. Like, was this guy a captain? Was he well-liked? Was he a leader? Jod Joyner was. He reminds me a lot of Dorrance Armstrong, who was with the Cowboys, signs a deal with the Washington Commanders this season, had a really good year. He is, you could almost say, a better version of A.J. Epinesa, where he doesn't really stand out in any regard, but he can play first and second down against the run, set a strong edge to his game. There's length. Occasionally, he'll string together some pass rush moves, good bull rushing power. Doesn't have a true standout trait, which is probably why he would be available second, third, fourth round. But if the Bills want to just replenish even the depth at edge, a lot like they have in the Sean McDermott era, Jod Joyner from Minnesota is a really fun name to me.
So I was going to ask you a couple questions about the current Bills rookie class, but I had a great thought. Last time we got together, I think, or 2 times ago, was at Wingnuts. Yeah. And Wingnuts just opened a new location right by the airport. So I think later in a month or 2, maybe a little bit after the draft, maybe we'll bring you out to a Wingnut show again, get you all, dialed up on wings and talk about the Bills, their sophomore class, whatever they do in the draft. We'll do a big kind of special that way if you're down.
I love coming on with you to talk Bills and talk NFL anytime, but you throw in Wingnuts, me being like a wing connoisseur, and getting some free Wingnuts that night, I'm definitely down.
Okay, so Ryan and I, cheap plug here, we will be at Wingnuts this Saturday night, 6 p.m., the new location on Genesee, connected to Buffalo Airport Hotel. Come out to Wingnuts. We'll be talking about all things NFL scouting combine, starting to kind of peek ahead to the start of free agency, taking fan questions. It's going to be a really good time. Joined by Chris Trapasso, CBS Sports. Go check out his latest mock draft right now. I was firing through his top big board, which you can find at the website as well. Appreciate you giving us some of your time. Your latest mock draft, with the Bills going wide receiver at pick number 30. And it's an interesting name that I've seen bantied about online the last couple of days. Matthew Golden. Some people, he's a very polarizing prospect. Some people are super high on him, and then some people kind of just leave him out of their, combine watch list altogether. Sure. What do you like about him? How do you feel like he would fit in this offense? And why would that be the pick where you took him in the mock draft?
Well, the Bills, and even someone that's doing a mock draft every week, have to go through different scenarios. And in this mock, there were just not those premier defensive tackles or the premier edge rushers available, which would most people would presume as the Bills' top 2 needs. So I think after that, to plan ahead for the future, to keep the bullets in the chamber at wide receiver, Matthew Golden might just be available. They don't need to trade up. He's not spectacular, but he does give speed. He does play on the outside. And late in the season at Texas, the quarterback play was not great. I'm not a big Quinn Ewers guy. Made a lot of catches near the sideline, body control, or back shoulder game that we know Josh Allen is not going to be afraid to throw the football to a wide receiver if he's not completely wide open. So I don't think Matthew Golden is going to test through the roof. I think the 40 will be pretty good. We heard Brandon Beane say yesterday that, sure, if he can add speed, he's going to try to do it. And that was really the one area that it felt like the Bills were lacking at wide receiver. For as good as the everybody eats philosophy worked out, they didn't have that downfield threat. Golden does have a little bit of juice down the field. Not going to be amazing in any one area, but it just ticks all the boxes, kind of like Jod Joyner does at edge rusher.
So I was reading up on Golden a little bit just so I'd have a basis, because I don't watch college football, so I rely on guys like you to kind of set this all up. One of the player comps that I saw out there was Chris Olave, and I would love to hear what you think about that, where you had Olave when he was coming out, because Olave is the guy that I thought was potentially a trade target this offseason for the Bills because New Orleans is resetting, whole new regime. He hasn't had a lot of success, their team success, and it's just like, I think that it might be his brother that's been very vocal on social media. So I thought that was a good idea. Better idea, draft a rookie version of Chris Olave. Is that a comp you like? And what did you think of Olave coming out?
Great question. And what would be good about that, too, with Matthew Golden is that he doesn't have the injury history. Chris Olave, a ton of concussions. He might be one away from having to retire, potentially. I think Olave was a better route runner, could get open just with his routes and changing speeds and head fakes and shoulder fakes. The body types are similar. The ball tracking specialty for Olave, very similar with Matthew Golden. Chris Olave ran in the, I believe, mid 4.3s. I don't know if Golden's going to be quite that fast. He's kind of like a poor man's Chris Olave. Now, at pick 30, is that great? You're like, maybe. With Josh Allen, could he get the most out of him? And we're talking about him maybe becoming Chris Olave 2.0, who, when healthy in New Orleans, was really good. Maybe that's how the Bills could ultimately see it, that they can get more out of these wide receivers because of the presence of Josh Allen.
So, in terms of like route runner, because to me, Stephon Diggs at his height with the Bills, that was what he brought more than anything. Was it the nuance of his route tree, his ability to separate? How does Golden fit that bill? And is there somebody else, like maybe a different flavor, that you think can be a deep threat, can offer a little bit more as a route runner at that spot, or maybe a little bit after or before? I know you're high on the Arizona kid. You could talk about him. And this draft, the way people have talked about wide receiver, it feels like the A.J. Brown, DK Metcalf draft, where it was like nobody was sticking out. There was no top 10 picks, or if there was, maybe one in the top.
Marquise Brown was like the late 25th pick, the first wide receiver. All the good receivers went in round 2. Yes. A.J. Brown, DK Metcalf, Deebo Samuel.
So does that feel like this is like you just got to find the one or two in this crop, and there's going to be real insane value there?
Absolutely. I feel like that's what we're going to get this year. We're not going to see, what do we have, 7 in the first round last year, all late. We could see 2 or 3, and it feels kind of strange in the modern day NFL where we're in a kind of a passing renaissance. You think, there's got to be wide receivers at 10 that go in the first round every year. That's not what we're going to get, I think, in this draft class. Ted McMillan from Arizona is in the range. T. Higgins to Drake London. That's where I view him. He's not bona fide number 1 receiver, have a Malik Neighbors type rookie season, but is a quality pro. In terms of Matthew Golden's route running, like I said, he's not as polished as, say, a Chris Olave now, but the fluidity, the smoothness as an athlete, I think he could become a better route runner. And Stephon Diggs, when he entered the NFL, was not the best route runner as a rookie or in year 2. It took him time in Minnesota, and then he really became that elite route runner in Buffalo. So there are a few others. I love Jack Bash from TCU. Watch his film. He reminds me so much of Puka Nacua. And to tie it back to Stephon Diggs. Now, I get... Is he a boundary guy primarily? Jack Bash is outside receiver, back shoulder, awesome after the catch. I love, too, with Jack Bash that he started at LSU, and as a freshman, had like 40-plus catches for 500 yards on a loaded offense as a 18-year-old freshman, transfers to TCU, goes over 1,000 yards without quality quarterback play. He's a gamer. He won Senior Bowl MVP. I really like him. That could be pick 30 or probably later. The one name I'll say, I'll tie it back to Stephon Diggs that I haven't told anyone else here this week. I tweeted it. Elijah Badger from Florida.
Arizona. Florida. Too soon? Kyrie Elam?
Yeah, maybe too soon, but I think Brandon Beane understands you can't just scout the helmets. Everyone's different. And what I'll say, Elijah Badger started his career at Arizona State. 2 seasons, he was one of the best yards after the catch, missed tackle force wide receivers in all of college football. Like, think Khalil Shakir just turning a bubble screen into a 10-yard gain. His final season, he transfers to Florida. The volume goes down a little bit. They had Graham Mertz, they had DJ Lagway playing, a bunch of different quarterbacks playing. 39 catches for 800 yards. He was a downfield guy, played on the outside. And when I'm watching him, I'm thinking, who does he remind me of? His movement skills, the way he really can beat press at the line reminds me of Stephon Diggs. Now, when I'm saying that, I'm not saying I am positive that Elijah Badger, who is a day 2 or day 3 guy right now, is going to be Stephon Diggs of 2020. But remember, Stephon Diggs was a 5th round pick. When I make the Jack Bash comparison for Puka Nacua on Twitter, people get after me. Puka Nacua was a 5th round pick that no one cared about, that didn't test very well. Same with Stephon Diggs. you can get quality players. The Bills, another 5th rounder, got Khalil Shakir. So those two, watch Elijah Badger. He has a highlight reel package on YouTube. Type it in. And Jack Bash. Those are my two like deeper sleepers for the Bills at wide receiver if they prioritize D tackle and edge rusher early in the draft.
Great stuff. Before we get out of here, I got one last kind of big picture question. So if you look at this class from a Bills fan's perspective, and you're sitting here watching the college football season, grinding all this tape, is there somebody at maybe a position that we're not talking about right now that you're like, maybe not even a position of need, but you're like, man, I really hope as a Bills fan they draft him?
Good question. You know what? I'll try to get a year ahead of it. RJ Harvey, UCF running back. He is in the range.
Now, is that you're gonna have to combine it with the James Cook take here?
Yeah. So I would not give James Cook $15 million a year.
What's your limit?
I wouldn't go more than 12. And in reality, I mean, I just wouldn't pay a running back big money going into a second contract at all. Now, do I think teams just say, hey, we're not going to offer you? No, like the Bills, if the Bills really don't want to keep him, they're not just going to say, go ahead, see you later. They'll still offer him something. I just think even though we're coming off a year, Derrick Henry, Saquon Barkley, Josh Jacobs, we also have had Bucky Irving, who I think RJ Harvey is a lot like, who is a 4th rounder. Chase Brown in Cincinnati was a 6th rounder. Tyrone Tracy was a 5th rounder for the Giants. So there's still been those great mid to late round running backs that have been efficient behind a good offensive line. The Bills have Aaron Cromer. The offensive line's fully intact. I feel like you in the future can plug in, I don't want to say anybody, but you can plug in someone that's not a highly paid running back and still get the production that you need. RJ Harvey, I mentioned it. He, to me, is in the range of Devin Singletary to Bucky Irving. He's not quite as explosive as Irving, but laterally making guys miss in tight quarters. He's like Devin Singletary 2.0. We know Brandon Beane picked him in the 3rd round in 2019 and raved about how difficult he was to tackle. Go watch film, RJ Harvey of UCF. If the Bills, trade back and have a bunch of extra picks, which they do have a lot of picks in this class, they've addressed some other needs. I wouldn't hate them planning for the future. And maybe they do even love James Cook. They just aren't going to be able to sign him. Planning ahead and having a contingency plan at running back, RJ Harvey would be the one for me.
Dude, this was absolutely brilliant stuff. Chris Trapasso, you can find him on Twitter at
Chris Trapasso.
Wow, crazy.
Yeah, I didn't want to go with like an AOL screen name or anything like that when I signed up.
Yeah, all right. Like Cold Plunge 101 or something like that. That's another thing that we share. You got me on the Cold Plunge game. I was doing a little bit. I told you I got a little sick. Got to get back on the train, but it's awesome.
Changes your life to a certain degree, doesn't it? It is nothing like a cup of coffee or even espresso in the morning does not compare to jumping in cold water for 2 minutes and getting out. You feel way more energized and it like lasts for a lot longer. It boosts the mood. I could just, it's like an infomercial for cold plunging, but it's funny that I talked to you about it and I'm thinking, Parrino's never going to do this, whatever. And he's texting me, oh my God, I love it. I do it every day. It's been great for me. So I'm like spreading the word for no reason other than just people that I like that I'm friends with. I want to share something that's been a lot of fun for me to do, especially living in Western New York. You get more accustomed to the cold too.
It's kind of like a notch on your belt, right?
Yeah.
Like, being able to do that in the middle of winter, it is crazy. What do you do on the road, by the way? Like, do you do it or you just skip and just wait?
I mean, I just do cold showers at the end. Like it is very hard to just get into a cold shower.
It's worse than the plunge for me.
It's worse than the plunge. But the last like minute or so, I just go as far down as I can, and that gives you the same effect. I'm not like
for how long?
Anywhere from 30 seconds to a minute. But when I do cold plunge, I go by the science and do 2 minutes to 3 minutes of just kind of meditation when you're in there. Then you get out, and then I've gotten to the point where as you get out, the feeling of your body instantly starting to warm up, I think is like the best. Yeah. It's amazing. It's something I've never.
You chase that.
You do. Absolutely.
Great stuff. Let everybody know what you got coming up. What they can find from you while you're here in Indy. Anything you want to plug.
So I just did a mock draft that came out Wednesday morning, a bunch of trades, Matt Stafford getting traded to the Giants, and then the Vikings trading Sam Darnold to the Rams. I think those could be a domino effect because Sean McVay, Kevin O'Connell know each other so well. And then later in the week when the workouts actually begin, I'll be part of the live blog at CBS, and then we're going to just grade the performances of the prospects in our top 50. We're going to just say, hey, this guy didn't run very well, C-. This guy tested through the roof, A+. We're going to move him up the board, so to speak. So I'll kind of continue on all the coverage throughout the weekend when these guys are actually on the field at Lucas Oil Stadium.
Great stuff. Come out to Wingnuts on Saturday night. Become a Shout Buffalo Bills insider, 716-528-6727. We'll see you soon, everybody. Take care. Thanks, Chris.
Thanks.